What does God's voice sound like? He does speak, you know. Here in John chapter 10, Jesus said, "My sheep listen to my voice," John 10, verse 3. So the shepherd does speak to his sheep. And if you're his sheep, you should be hearing God's voice. A lot of times you're hearing God's voice and you just don't even recognize it. People will often say, I get nervous about those preachers that say God told them this and God told them that. Well, I get nervous about those preachers that never hear God's voice. The truth is, God does speak to us. Sometimes you just don't recognize what the voice sounds like. Just the other day, I picked up the church phone and the person said, "I really would like to speak to the bishop about something." I said, "Go ahead, this is he." Evidently, the person didn't notice that and said, "So could you give the bishop a message to call me up?" And I said, let me say it again. "I am the bishop." "Oh, you're the bishop. I never expected you to answer the church phone." So, they just didn't recognize my voice. They didn't know what I sounded like. And sometimes you may just not know what Jesus' voice sounds like. But can I tell you what it sounds like? I want you to look at John 10, verse 3, which proves that God's voice, Jesus does speak to us. But listen to Romans chapter 10. It says in verse 16, "But not all the Israelites accepted the good news. So Isaiah says, 'Lord, who has believed our message?' Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ." Are you ready for this? God's voice sounds like faith. You see, when God speaks to you, faith comes. 41 years ago, maybe 42 years ago, I heard God's voice telling me to start a church and where to start it. And somebody says, "Well, that's outlandish. How can you say God spoke to me?" He did. "Oh, you think I'm going to start a church on my own? You better believe that I'm not going to do that." So how do I know he spoke to me? It's real simple. Faith came up in my heart. I knew the church would succeed. That's faith. See, when God speaks to you about your salvation, how does it come? How does he witness in your spirit? How does the voice of the Holy Spirit witness to your spirit? It witnesses in the form of assurance. You have the assurance of salvation. Where did that assurance come from? It came from the Holy Spirit speaking to your heart. You see, people ask me oftentimes, I feel pressured by one group to do this, and I feel pressured by another group to do this. But I don't know. What is God saying to me? I need his direction. I need him to lead me. And of course, God leads us by his voice. Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 3, "My sheep listen to my voice, and I lead them." So, of course, that's how God leads us, by his voice. And I tell people all the time, don't be pressured by this group or that group. Listen to the inward voice. What is the voice telling you? "Well, I don't know. I don't know how to recognize a voice." Yes, you do. It's called assurance. It's called faith. You see, so whenever God speaks to you, it's going to come in the form of faith. So if you feel pressure to do something, you decide to do something because you think you ought to, but you don't have any faith in doing it, that's not God speaking to you. So you got to pull back and say, no, I'm not going to do something because I feel guilty about not doing it. No, you got to do it because of faith. So that is how the voice of God sounds like. It sounds like faith.